Think you know history? Think again? Welcome to Echoes of the Past, where we bring you the untold stories and mysteries that shaped our world. From ancient civilizations to forgotten heroes, we'll explore the incredible tales that history books left behind. Get ready to journey through time and discover the echoes of events that still resonate today. Join us and let's unlock the past together.
The year was 238 AD, a time of turmoil for the Roman Empire. Blood had stained the imperial throne, and Rome had seen 6 emperors rise and fall within a single year. The city, once the heart of an unshakable empire, was now a battlefield of political intrigue, military uprisings, and senatorial power struggles. It was in this storm that a boy, barely 13 years old, was thrust onto the throne, Gordian III. He had not sought power, nor was he prepared for it. He was the grandson of Gordian I and the nephew of Gordian II, both of whom had perished in their failed rebellion against the brutal Maximinus Thrax. The Senate, desperate to maintain control after the assassination of Balbinus and Pupienus, saw no better option than to place the young boy at the head of the empire. The people of Rome rejoiced. Here was a child untainted by corruption, a figure of hope in a fractured empire. But behind the golden laurels of his coronation, true power lay in the hands of others. For the first 3 years of his reign, Gordian was emperor in name only. The Senate, the Praetorian Guard, and his own mother, Misia Faustina, dictated his rule. To secure their hold on the empire, a new elite guard was formed, the Candidati, hand-picked warriors meant to protect the boy emperor from the dangerous remnants of Maximinus Thrax's supporters. Yet, despite these measures, the empire was anything but secure. In the provinces, rebellion simmered, while Rome's enemies, the Goths, the Moors, and the mighty Sassanid Empire, watched like vultures, waiting for a moment of weakness. The empire's treasury, drained from years of internal strife, needed replenishing. The ruling Senate sought to win public favor by distributing wealth to the people, but their generosity came at a cost. Coins were debased, their silver content reduced, leading to inflation and economic uncertainty. The soldiers, upon whom the empire's security depended, were kept loyal through these payouts, but even this would not hold them forever. Yet for all the political maneuvering, the empire still had one advantage: Gordian III himself. The boy was not merely a puppet, he was intelligent, well-educated, and eager to prove himself. Unlike the despised Maximinus Thrax, he was raised in the traditions of Rome, learning philosophy, rhetoric, and military strategy from the finest minds of his time. He admired Alexander the Great and dreamed of leading legions to glory. The people of Rome believed in him, and perhaps, in time, he would grow into the ruler they needed. But time was not on his side. By 239 AD, Gordian III was still a boy, but the world around him was far from childish. Though he sat on the throne, it was the Senate, the aristocracy, and a shifting group of powerful men who truly ruled. His mother, Misia Faustina, held influence, but she was not alone. The Praetorian Guard, eager to maintain its grip on imperial politics, worked in the shadows, while senators sought to restore the stability of the Severan dynasty. For the time being, Rome was at peace internally, but its frontiers were on fire. In the African provinces, a senator named Sabinianus, emboldened by Rome's weakened state, declared himself emperor in 240 AD. He seized control of Carthage, one of Rome's most vital cities, threatening the grain supply upon which the empire depended. But this rebellion was crushed swiftly by the governor of Mauritania, Faltonius Restitutianus, whose loyalty to Gordian remained firm. The would-be usurper was handed over to imperial authorities, and order was restored. Yet Africa was only one front. The empire's true enemies lay beyond its borders. The West, the Moors, skilled raiders from the mountains and deserts, launched attacks on Roman settlements in Mauritania, Numidia, and Tripolitania. Without the powerful Legio III Augusta, which had been disbanded after supporting the wrong side in Rome's power struggles, there were too few soldiers to hold the line. Roman defenses built by the Severan dynasty were beginning to crumble. The Casella, fortified outposts in the desert, were abandoned one by one, and entire cities were left exposed. The Romans had long relied on walls, forts, and strategic frontier settlements to keep the Moors at bay, but now these defenses were stretched thin. The province needed a strong military presence, yet Rome's rulers had other priorities. The growing conflict with the Sassanid Persians in the east demanded attention, and the treasury could not afford to raise new legions for Africa. Instead, local militias were formed, and commanders in the region were ordered to hold the line with what forces they had. Meanwhile, to the north, trouble brewed along the Rhine and Danube. Maximinus Thrax's brutal campaigns had subdued Rome's barbarian neighbors temporarily, but the Franks, Alemanni, and Saxons had not forgotten their defeats. Treasure hoards buried during this period suggest that raiders were attacking settlements along the northern coasts, particularly in Belgica and Gaul. The legions stationed there, depleted by years of internal conflicts, struggled to protect the frontiers. But none of these challenges compared to the threat posed by the rising power of the Sassanid Empire. To the east, in Persia, a new king, Shapur I, had ascended the throne after the death of his father, Ardashir I. Unlike the decaying Parthian dynasty Rome had fought for centuries, the Sassanids were energetic and ambitious. They sought to reclaim the lands once held by the Achaemenid kings, and they saw Rome as their greatest obstacle. In 239 AD, the first signs of war emerged. The Persians attacked the city of Hatra, a Roman ally, and by 240 AD they had captured it. The fall of Hatra was a shocking blow. Its thick walls had resisted even the might of Emperor Septimius Severus decades earlier. Now the gates were broken and the city was left in ruins. Shapur, celebrating his victory, had its ruler executed and his daughter Nadira put to death in a gruesome spectacle. With Hatra gone, Persia set its sights on greater prizes. By 241 AD, Shapur's armies advanced into Roman Mesopotamia, capturing the fortress cities of Nisibis and Cary. The war had begun. While the empire burned, power in Rome shifted yet again. For years, Gordian had been surrounded by a group of palace eunuchs who held sway over appointments and decisions. Corruption flourished. Military commands were bought and sold, and the empire's defenses were entrusted to men who had bribed their way into power rather than those with real experience. Among these unworthy appointees was a man named Felicio, who was granted command of the Praetorian Guard despite his incompetence. But in 241 AD, things changed. Gordian, now a teenager, was beginning to assert his own authority. He found a mentor in a brilliant administrator and military strategist, Gaius Furius Sabinus Aquila Timesitheus. Timesitheus had served under previous emperors and had built a reputation as a capable leader. He understood both politics and war, and when he became Gordian's closest advisor, the boy emperor finally had someone who could guide him properly. Recognizing the dangers of corruption, Timesitheus acted quickly. The eunuchs were removed from power, Felicio was dismissed, and experienced men were put in charge of the legions. To cement his position, Timesitheus arranged a marriage between his daughter, Furia Sabinia Tranquillina, and Gordian III. With this union, Timesitheus became not only the emperor's most trusted advisor, but also his father-in-law. With a firm hand now guiding the empire, preparations for war against Persia began in earnest. The empire would not stand idle while Shapur conquered Roman lands. The time had come for Gordian to prove himself, not as a boy but as a warrior. By the spring of 242 AD, Rome was no longer on the defensive. The empire had stabilized under the firm leadership of Timesitheus, and the Eastern campaign was now the single greatest priority. Gordian III, no longer the helpless child emperor, had a purpose: to lead Rome's legions against the Sassanid Empire and reclaim the lost provinces. For decades, the East had been the heart of Rome's military focus. The region's wealth, trade routes, and strategic cities made it a constant battleground between Rome and Persia. Now, with Shapur I pushing deep into Syria, it was clear that a response had to be swift and decisive. The young emperor, barely 16, prepared to lead the largest Roman military expedition in years. The army of Gordian III. The army assembled for the Persian campaign was immense. Tens of thousands of legionaries, auxiliaries, and cavalry forces were called from every corner of the empire. The Danube and Rhine frontiers were weakened as seasoned troops were withdrawn to join the campaign. This was a dangerous gamble. Barbarian raids could increase, but it was necessary. Rome needed its best soldiers for what lay ahead. Among the key units in Gordian's army were Legio III Gallica, a battle-hardened legion stationed in Syria, known for its discipline. Legio IV Scythica, originally formed to fight the Scythians, now deployed against Persia. Legio I and the III Parthica, the elite forces stationed in Mesopotamia, specialists in Eastern warfare. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal guard, reformed under Timesitheus. Pomeran cavalry, light horsemen from the desert, experts in swift raids and ambushes. Cataphracts and Clibinorii, heavily armored cavalry, some recruited from the defeated Gothic and Sarmatian tribes. The logistical challenge of moving such an army was immense. Timesitheus, with his experience in administration, ensured that massive grain supplies were stockpiled, weapons and armor were in abundance, and supply lines were carefully mapped. The army would march overland through the Balkans, across Asia Minor, and then into Syria, where they would engage the Persian forces. Before setting out, Gordian III performed the traditional ritual of war. He ordered the doors of the Temple of Janus in Rome to be opened. This ancient practice symbolized that the empire was at war. The people of Rome, still enamored with their young emperor, cheered him on. Statues of Gordian were erected throughout the city, and coins were minted bearing inscriptions such as Orins Augusti, the rising of the emperor in the east, emphasizing his role as Rome's avenger. As the army marched through the provinces, Gordian was greeted as a hero. In cities like Nicaea, Antioch in Pisidia, and Iconium, triumphal processions were held in his honor. The soldiers, initially skeptical of their young commander, began to believe that he might indeed be the savior Rome needed. However, before reaching Persia, Rome had to deal with another threat. Barbarians had invaded the Balkans. In Thrace and Moesia, Gothic and Carpi raiders had crossed the Danube, pillaging Roman settlements. Worse still, a large force of Sarmatians had entered Pannonia, threatening the empire's northern defenses. Timesitheus acted swiftly. The Roman army, now reinforced with auxiliary cavalry from Germanic and Sarmatian recruits, engaged the invaders near the city of Philippi in Macedonia. Here, Gordian III would face his first true test in battle. The battle was chaotic. The Alans, a fierce nomadic people allied with the Goths, used their signature cavalry tactics, rapid charges followed by feigned retreats to lure the Romans into disorder. At one point, Gordian, eager to prove himself, personally led a charge against the enemy. It nearly ended in disaster. The Roman cavalry was overwhelmed, and the young emperor was forced to retreat behind the infantry lines. Timesitheus, seeing the danger, quickly reformed the Roman lines. The legions formed the classic testudo tortoise formation, presenting an impenetrable wall of shields. As the enemy cavalry charged again, they were met with a hail of javelins and pila. The disciplined Roman troops then counterattacked, breaking the barbarian ranks. By the end of the battle, the Romans were victorious, but Gordian had learned a valuable lesson. War was not about reckless bravery, but about discipline, strategy, and patience. The army continued its march, leaving behind a Rome that, for now, was secure. After pacifying the Balkans, the Roman army crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor. Here, the legions stopped at the great city of Antioch to prepare for the final leg of their journey. In the meantime, news from the east worsened. The Persians had continued their advance, reaching deep into Syria. They had taken the wealthy city of Antioch, and their armies had pushed as far as the Euphrates. The legions needed to move quickly if they were to stop Shapur before he advanced any further. By early 243 AD, Gordian's forces crossed into Mesopotamia. The first objective was clear: recapture Nisibis and Cary, the fortresses that had fallen to the Persians the previous year. The young emperor, now 17, stood at the head of one of the largest Roman armies ever assembled. Victory seemed within reach. As the banners of Rome fluttered in the desert wind, the soldiers cheered for their emperor. Gordian III, the boy who had once been a mere figurehead, was now leading an army into the heart of Persia. The final confrontation was coming. By the spring of 243 AD, Gordian III stood on the banks of the Euphrates, staring eastward toward the vast Persian Empire. Behind him, the greatest military force Rome had assembled in years stretched across the plains. Legionaries in their shining armor, auxiliary cavalry ready for battle, and siege engines prepared to retake the lost cities of Mesopotamia. Ahead lay the armies of Shapur I, King of Kings, ruler of the Sassanid Empire. The war had already cost Rome dearly. Nisibis, Cary, and even Antioch had fallen. If Gordian failed here, the eastern provinces would be lost and the Persian threat would grow even stronger. The young emperor, now 17, was ready for the greatest challenge of his life. The Roman plan was simple but ambitious. Timesitheus, the empire's true strategist, devised a two-pronged attack. One force led by experienced commanders would strike directly at the Persian army in Syria, while the main force, led by Gordian himself, would march eastward to retake the lost fortresses of Mesopotamia. The first objective was Nisibis, a critical fortress city that had long served as Rome's stronghold on the Persian frontier. The city's walls were thick and its defenses were formidable, but Gordian's army was prepared. Using siege engines, battering rams, and coordinated assaults, the Romans launched their attack. For days, the battle raged outside Nisibis. Persian defenders rained arrows and stones from the battlements, while Roman engineers built siege towers and dug trenches to weaken the walls. Gordian himself was often seen on the front lines, rallying his men and inspiring confidence. Then, after weeks of relentless assault, the walls finally cracked. Roman soldiers stormed through the city, engaging the Persian defenders in brutal street-to-street combat. By the end of the battle, Nisibis was once again under Roman control. The banners of the empire flew high above its towers, and the army celebrated its first major victory. With Nisibis secured, the Romans pushed further east toward the city of Ricena, near the Tigris River. Here, Shapur I finally made his stand. The Persian king, realizing that Gordian's forces were advancing rapidly, gathered his elite cavalry, heavily armored cataphracts, and thousands of archers. He would not let Rome take another step into his lands without a fight. The Battle of Ricena would determine the fate of the war. As the Roman legions deployed in their disciplined formations, the Persian army arranged itself opposite them. The Persian archers, known for their deadly precision, began the battle with a relentless rain of arrows. Roman shields locked together in a testudo, but the sheer volume of missiles forced the legions to press forward. Then came the charge. The Persian cataphracts, massive war horses covered in armor, thundered toward the Roman lines. Timesitheus, anticipating this, had placed his best infantry in the center, forming an unbreakable shield wall. The impact was brutal. Roman soldiers were thrown back, but they did not break. At the right moment, Gordian III ordered the counterattack. Roman cavalry, including the Pomeranian horse archers and Gothic lancers recruited from the Balkans, flanked the Persian lines. The legions, pushing forward with their short swords, gladii, cut through the enemy ranks. the battle turned into a slaughter. By the end of the day, the Persians were in full retreat. Risena was reclaimed, and Shapur's forces were driven back across the Tigris. It was the greatest Roman victory in decades. In the aftermath of the battle, Gordian III was hailed as imperator by his soldiers. Coins were minted celebrating his triumph, and messages were sent to Rome announcing the victory. The young emperor had proven himself on the battlefield. He was no longer a puppet of the Senate or the Praetorian Guard. He was a true warrior. Shapur, recognizing the strength of the Roman army, proposed a temporary truce. For the first time, the mighty Sassanid Empire had been checked. Gordian and Timesitheus now faced a crucial decision. Should they march further east and strike into the Persian heartland, or secure their gains and consolidate power? Timesitheus, ever the strategist, advised caution. The Romans had won a great battle, but their supply lines were stretched thin, and a prolonged war deep in enemy territory could be disastrous. Gordian, eager for more glory, was tempted to press on, but he trusted his father-in-law's wisdom. The decision was made. The army would rest and prepare for further campaigns, but for now the empire was safe. Rome had not seen such a victory in years, and across the provinces, people celebrated their young emperor. Statues were erected, poems were written, and for the first time in his reign, Gordian III was seen as a worthy ruler. But this moment of triumph would not last forever. In the shadows, a new danger was rising, one that would come not from Persia, but from within the empire itself. The Roman banners flew high over Nisibis and Risena, and across the empire, Gordian III was hailed as a victorious emperor. His campaign against Persia had been an overwhelming success, and with his mentor and father-in-law Timesitheus at his side, it seemed that Rome had finally regained its footing after years of chaos. But beneath the surface, danger lurked. The empire's greatest threats had never just been foreign enemies. It was within Rome itself that emperors lived and died by the whims of ambitious men. And now one such man had set his sights on the throne, Marcus Julius Philippus, better known as Philip the Arab. In late 243 AD, after the victory at Risena, the Roman army prepared for the next phase of the campaign. Shapur had retreated beyond the Tigris, but Persia was far from defeated. Many of Gordian's officers, especially Timesitheus, believed that this was the perfect moment to push further into Persian territory. If the Romans could reach Ctesiphon, the Sassanid capital, they could deal a fatal blow to the Persian king and end the war on their terms. But then disaster struck. Timesitheus, the architect of Rome's recent victories, suddenly fell ill. What began as a minor fever rapidly worsened, and within days the man who had guided Gordian III for years was dead. The official story was that he had succumbed to disease common in military campaigns, but whispers spread through the ranks. Some believed that he had been poisoned, that someone had removed him to clear the way for their own rise to power. And that someone was Philip the Arab. Philip had been appointed as Timesitheus's co-prefect of the Praetorian Guard, a position of immense power second only to the emperor himself. Now, with Timesitheus gone, Philip wasted no time in securing his control over the army. He positioned himself as Gordian's most trusted advisor, but in truth, he was already plotting against him. Philip knew that as long as Gordian III remained in power, he would always be second in command. But the legions loved their young emperor. He had led them to victory, and they had crowned him imperator after Risena. Killing him outright would provoke rebellion. Instead, Philip began a slow and calculated campaign of manipulation. First, he spread doubt about continuing the war. He told the officers that Rome's victories were already enough, that marching further into Persia was too risky. He claimed that the army's supply lines were overextended, that food was running low, that they were marching into a trap. At the same time, he tightened his grip over the legions, ensuring that his own loyal men were placed in key positions. Slowly, the morale of the army shifted. Soldiers who had once been eager for battle now grumbled about exhaustion. Some even began to question whether Gordian was making the right choices. And all the while, Philip gained more and more control. By early 244 AD, Gordian III and his army had moved south, nearing the fortress city of Sircesium on the banks of the Euphrates. The campaign was at a crossroads. Some officers still urged Gordian to press on, but others, those loyal to Philip, pushed for a return to Rome. Then the final betrayal came. At some point during the march, something went terribly wrong. Roman sources are conflicting, but one thing is clear: Gordian III died near Sircesium. Some accounts claim that he was assassinated, killed by his own soldiers under Philip's orders. Others say that he died in battle, ambushed by the Persians after Philip deliberately weakened the army's position. The most likely truth is that Philip staged a coup. He turned the legions against their emperor, declared himself ruler, and had Gordian quietly murdered. His death was covered up with vague explanations. Some said he had fallen ill, others that he had died in battle. But those who had fought beside him knew better. Their young emperor had been betrayed. With Gordian dead, Philip wasted no time in securing his rule. He quickly negotiated a peace with Shapur I, ending the war on terms that were far less favorable than what Rome could have achieved. In exchange for the return of some Roman territories, Philip paid Persia a massive sum of gold, effectively buying peace rather than winning it. Then he turned his attention to Rome. He declared himself emperor, sending messages to the Senate confirming that he had taken power. To justify his actions, he spread the story that Gordian III had died in battle, an unfortunate casualty of war. He even allowed Gordian to be deified, an empty honor meant to pacify those who still mourned him. But among the soldiers, resentment grew. Many of them had loved Gordian. He had been young, yes, but he had led them to victory. And now that victory had been stolen from them. Gordian III was buried near Sircesium, where his soldiers erected a tomb in his honor. An inscription written in Latin, Greek, Persian, Hebrew, and Egyptian declared him conqueror of the Persians, conqueror of the Goths, conqueror of the Sarmatians. But one line stood out, but not the conqueror of Philippi. It was a bitter joke, a pun on Philip's name, a reminder that Gordian had been betrayed not by his enemies, but by his own men. His reign, once full of promise, ended in treachery. He had led Rome to victory, but he would not return to see its triumph. His name would fade from history, overshadowed by the man who had stolen his throne. Yet for those who had fought beside him, Gordian III was not forgotten. To them, he was not just a boy emperor, he was Rome's last true warrior king. The once victorious legions marched back to Rome, but there was no celebration. The banners that had flown high over Mesopotamia now hung limply, their bearers weary and uncertain. The emperor who had led them to triumph over Persia was gone, and in his place stood Philip the Arab, a man whose rule had begun with betrayal. For the people of Rome, the news was sudden and confusing. Gordian III, their young and beloved ruler, had supposedly perished in battle. Yet no triumph was declared, no captured Persian treasures paraded through the streets. Instead, a somber decree arrived: Gordian was dead and Philip was emperor. Philip, eager to solidify his power, knew he could not afford open resentment, so he took the safest course of action. He had the Senate deify Gordian III. The young emperor was now a divus, a god among Rome's pantheon. Statues were erected in his honor and coins were minted with his image, showing him crowned by the gods. It was an empty gesture, a way for Philip to ease the transition while he secured his grip on power. But among the soldiers, the betrayal was not forgotten. Gordian III was buried near Sircesium, the place of his final stand. His tomb, built by the very soldiers who had once cheered his name, bore an inscription in multiple languages: Latin, Greek, Persian, Hebrew, and Egyptian, a testament to his rule over a vast and diverse empire. It read, "To the honor of the Emperor Gordianus, conqueror of the Persians, conqueror of the Goths, conqueror of the Sarmatians, but not the conqueror of Philippi." The last line was a bitter mark of defiance. The soldiers knew the truth. They knew that Gordian had not fallen to a Persian sword, but to treachery from within. The pun on Philip's name was a silent accusation, a whispered truth passed among the legions. Years later, when Philip's own rule crumbled and he was overthrown, those same soldiers would take grim satisfaction in his downfall. What if Gordian III had lived? What if Philip had never risen to power? Historians would long debate the possibilities. At the time of his death, Gordian had already achieved what many emperors before him had failed to do. He had crushed Persia in open battle and stood on the verge of an even greater conquest. If he had continued his campaign, he might have brought the Sassanid Empire to its knees. Would he have marched to Ctesiphon, the Persian capital, as Trajan had done over a century earlier? Would he have secured a lasting Roman dominance in the East? And what of Rome itself? Unlike the corrupt emperors before him, Gordian III had been beloved by the Senate, the people, and the army alike. He was young, untainted by political games, and most importantly, he had shown that he could lead. With more time, he might have become one of Rome's greatest rulers. Instead, Rome fell into further decline. Philip's rule was marked by instability and rebellion. His peace with Persia was seen as a humiliation, and in the provinces, resentment festered. The legions, still bitter over Gordian's betrayal, never fully accepted him. Eventually, in 249 AD, Philip himself was killed in battle, another victim of Rome's endless cycle of civil war. Though his reign was brief, Gordian III's memory endured. His statues remain standing in Rome, his deified image preserved in coinage for decades after his death. His name was spoken with a mixture of admiration and sorrow: admiration for what he had achieved, sorrow for what had been stolen from him. To the people of Rome, he was a tragic figure, the last young hope of an empire that would soon descend into its darkest days. To the soldiers who had followed him, he was the emperor who had fought beside them, the boy who had become a warrior, the leader they had believed in. And to history, he was the emperor who should have been.